Is W-OLED dead? Well, let's have a discussion about that. I think the narrative being pushed out there is that QD-OLED is the best technology that you could possibly buy. And I think in a lot of cases, I agree with that. But we have to put a little bit of an emphasis on what kind of QD-OLED. Because if you're looking at the S90D, the S90D is really good, and they fixed a lot of the issues that were on the S90C. But the topic of W-OLED versus QD-OLED at the very top level is pretty close when we're talking about the G4 versus the S95D, and it really comes down to what kind of picture preference you prefer. The G4 is doing some things where you have a little bit more emphasis on picture clarity, where it's kind of bringing out more details because it's doing some extra edge enhancement and some extra things with the tone mapping that the S95D isn't quite doing. The S95D is actually the more pure picture in a lot of ways, which is kind of funny to say out loud because of how Samsung was scrutinized with the S95B when it came down to their first QD-OLED release. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the TV shootout that happened at Value Electronics, what you noticed was the QD-OLEDs were the top TVs there, and the S95D actually wasn't that far behind the A95L. And in a lot of people's mind, the S95D is actually the better TV overall. Weirdly enough, I actually prefer the G4 to the S95D in many cases when we're talking about watching movies and TV shows. That's kind of the TV I like because of what it does with the picture processing. And the reason for this is the emphasis on picture depth, the emphasis on the edge enhancement. It took a lot of what Sony is doing with their processing, and in a lot of ways, they executed it to a degree where you get a little bit more picture depth out of it, giving you almost like a 3D-like effect. And I think this is really important to emphasize that when it comes down to color brightness, the W-OLEDs are not going to be able to hold a candle to the top QD-OLEDs. For example, the G4 and the S95D, when you're talking about color brightness, it's no doubt about it, the S95D is going to win that battle all day and all night. But the G4 definitely isn't a slouch. However, on the default tone mapping mode that it ships in, it kind of is a bummer that you lose color in a lot of cases really fast. And it's something that I really do recommend people use professional mode with the G4 to somewhat alleviate this. Now that is a great thing and all, but ultimately, the color is going to be better on the S95D, so in a lot of ways, the S95D is better than the G4 in many cases, and I think it's going to come down to picture preference whether or not you like the G4 better than the S95D. And with the S95D, you actually have to keep in mind with the screen coating. Now, the A95L doesn't have this screen coating in its QD-OLED, and it is a really great TV overall, so if you don't like the screen coating on the S95D and you like QD-OLED, go with the A95L. However, I can't really say the same thing about the S90D. As great as the S90D is, and I think it is the best bang for your buck OLED TV that you can buy, it's not on the same level as the G4, the S95D, and the A95L. It's just not. So when you're looking at the S90D and the C4, it's actually pretty comparable. Again, we do have color brightness advantages for the S90D, but in terms of actual pure brightness, there's times where the C4 is brighter than the S90D due to the way that the TV is aggressively tone mapping on the S90D itself. You could see that, man, sometimes the brightness just isn't as bright as the C4, and that's kind of a bummer. But when it comes down to color brightness, yes, of course, the S90D is not as bright as the C4. Now, there is one area where I think W-OLED does tend to suffer, and that is going to be with game mode. And game mode really relies on high color brightness in certain cases. And in the case of LG OLED TVs, for example, like the C4 and the G3 of last year, you really did lose a lot of color brightness. On top of what you already didn't have, you lost even more in game mode. So yeah, you get a decrease in color brightness in game mode for the C4. So that automatically is going to make the S90D look leaps and bounds better. And the Bravia 8 surprisingly looked better than the C4 in game mode as well. Significantly better. And I have shown that in my comparisons. So I feel strongly in saying that the C4 is last when it comes down to those three TVs in terms of game mode picture quality. And the S90D is no doubt about it the top. So would that mean that the S90D is a far and away better TV than the C4? In some cases, yes, but in some other cases, I think the C4 could be a better TV for a lot of people. It really depends on what you do with your use case. So for this reason, I can't say that W-OLED is dead, but it certainly is on kind of death's doorstep because QD-OLED is just going to keep getting better, brighter, more colorful, and it's just going to be something that the W-OLED can't get to because this white subpixel is holding them back. And that's one thing, W-OLED will always be a W-OLED at the end of the day. They can make the panels that are equipped with the MLA brighter overall, but it still won't be able to cover for the color brightness loss that you're going to get when it's up against something like the S95 series from Samsung or the A95 series from Sony. I'm kind of ranting in this video and I do apologize. I hope you guys enjoy this style of video. I just kind of wanted to get in front of the camera and talk about TV technology for a second because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, W-OLED can't compete. But I'm like, it can, but it can't, you know, like, it really depends on the situation. Like I said, the S90D, the C4, you can make cases for the C4 there. You can make cases for the Bravia 8 over the S90D. You really can. But the S95D is just on a whole different level when it comes down to the overall capability of the TV. So I hear people when they say they like the S95D's capability better, the A95L's capability better. There's no doubt about it. I get that. But I still do like what the G4 brings. And you guys know I'm really critical of LG. So for me to say that the G4 is probably one of my favorite TVs this year, if not my favorite TV this year, and like if I had to choose one to buy, it's probably the G4, that says a lot, right? But I have to say that if I was buying the G4, I would use a different TV for gaming entirely. Even though the G4 is capable of really good gaming and there's not really any loss when you go into game mode, I still would prefer QD-OLED for gaming, so I think I'd still use like my S95B for game mode. And I did actually compare my S95B game mode to the G4's game mode, and I still liked my S95B better. So as good as the G4's game mode is, it's not Quantum.OLED, and that's probably going to be the biggest limitation. And I feel like we're going to keep having this conversation. It's not Quantum.OLED. At the end of the day, that's going to be the discussion, right? It's not QD-OLED. It's not really worth my time. That might be what a lot of people say. But don't sleep on W-OLED. It's not quite dead yet, and I think that the C4 is a really good TV, the Bravia 8 is a really good TV, and the S90D in the 42-inch size, 48-inch size, 83-inch size, they're really good TVs. And I think it would surprise you that, you know, going from a QD-OLED S90D to a W-OLED S90D, that difference isn't as large as people think. And that's because the S90D is somewhat limited, especially compared to the S95D. So when outlets say that the S90D is much better than the S95D and just about as bright, I can't really wrap my head around that. They knocked it out of the park, man. I feel like Samsung has improved so much from the S95B's launch. They really just kind of nail it for many different parties. Reference people like this TV, preference people like this TV, gamers love this TV. Samsung has definitely released a product that everybody can love, except for if you don't like that screen coating. I think that's probably the biggest problem with the S95D for people, and hopefully that won't be the case next year. We'll see maybe 2 different models, but I kind of have my doubts about that. I think they'll go with one or the other. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys like that finish, or do you like the glossy finish? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your answer. If you guys enjoyed this OLED-based discussion, check out some of my OLED comparison videos. I think they could help you out a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.